Welcome to the first broadcast of DECB. This is DECB Economics TV. This is our opening statement, our welcome to you to a new channel. Well, if you've been watching the U.S. primaries or any election in any country and they're talking about jobs, they're talking about paying the bills, and they're talking about the economy and the whole issue when anyone runs, it's the economy stupid. Uh, this channel is going to deal specifically with the economics of any environment, particularly global economics. So this can apply anywhere in the world. But we're going to specifically look at the American situation, and then we'll see how the American situation applies elsewhere and how it is being applied elsewhere, because this is something that can be done and is being done. Give an example. If you are a person who are of the Obama persuasion, who views Obama's economic policy to be the thing, you can see Obama's economic results in Europe. Why? Because if you look at the Reagan view of economics, that can be seen in China and India. So the economic policies that a government comes up with has a real impact. We've seen now in history, we've got a good historical example of what happens when you move towards a Republican economic system, like we had under Ronald Reagan, or a economic situation or a socialist economic situation that we have under Obama. And this is what we can see in Europe. Obama is borrowing from the European economic model. And this is where he and his group and people who are like-minded believe the economy should be going. While his counterparts, his opposition in the Republican Party, even though they cannot bring themselves to mention this because of their xenophobia, should really be looking to China and India to say, well, if China and India are following the Republican economic model, and they're doing what they're doing, and they don't have any austerity, their economy is doing well, then it must be the economic policies of Europe, the socialist economic policies of Europe, that are causing the problem. And as you get down into the nitty-gritty of the things, you can see this. I'll give you an example. The European economic model now states that we have to consider the environment, and it considers carbon dioxide to be a pollutant, even though there's no real scientific evidence that this is the case. There's a lot of people standing up and making a lot of noise about this, but then again, most of these scientists who are saying that this is what the case is are government-paid scientists, and the government has placed stipulations that the only way they can get funding is if they're talking about issues that are socially relevant. This is the whole new dynamic. This is the whole new paradigm in science now. If you are a scientist and you're on the government payroll, that means you're in a university and you want to keep your lab open, then your research has to be socially relevant. And because the social relevancy now by these political dictates is climate change and the damage caused by man to the environment because of CO2, then your research needs to be oriented in that direction, or you're not going to get the funding. And if your research shows that this to be wrong, you're also not going to get funding either. So in other words, in order to keep your funding and get your funding for your job, your reports need to show that carbon dioxide is bad, that man is harming the environment, and that if anything else comes into contradiction with that, it has to be shoved off to the side. And we've seen this with the problems with the data from the Met Office. We've seen this with the problem with the International Panel on Climate Change. We've seen how their computer models were really way off. They've been predicting stronger hurricanes now and larger hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico for the longest period now, and they haven't happened. And so they had to change their model. Say, oh, well, now weather is no longer connected to the climate. This is a completely separate thing. or before it was. If you look at the earlier reports, you'll see they're talking about how climate and everything, the warming of the climate affects the strong weather. And they were arguing that the economic benefit for bringing in carbon dioxide as a pollutant would be that you would offset the insurance cost, because every time you have a storm, you have damage in the storm, and this damage, if the storm is being worsened by pollutants, this economic damage will be passed on to the consumer in order to recover the payouts that these insurance companies had to do. For those of you who don't understand insurance is basically a pool of capital that gets invested and is used to pay off damages and debt in a particular incident. Now, the way it works is that everybody has to pay into this pool. The more people, not everybody, the more people who pay into the pool, let's say you have a cost of $10. If you have one person, and this is a single payer version of an insurance model, one person who pays $10, who has a cost of $10, will have to pay that $10 plus interest. If you have 10 people as paying for that one cost, that insurance cost of $10, is $1 per person pays. So instead of having one person pay $10, you now have 10 people paying $1. Very simple math. You can do it on your fingers if you need to. And now you can understand how the more people you have in an insurance system, the better, because you can spread the cost of whatever you're paying for over however many people are paying into this pool. The problem is that this pool isn't infinite. You don't have an infinite number of resources because the people who are paying into it don't have an infinite amount of money. You can't keep upping the cost of insurance. There's a limit to how much your insurance that you can charge a person for insurance, because there's a limit to how much free capital, how much free money they have left to spend. And if you keep pushing your insurance costs up, other costs, including costs for what you have to spend on food, has to go down. In other words, when one cost goes up, other costs have to come off or go down in order to offset the higher cost. And this actually is sort of what's hitting a lot of people hard, and that as their insurance prices have gone up, they've had to scale back on their food, they've had to scale back on their home payments. And for businesses, this in many cases, if you have a higher insurance cost for employees, you have to lay off employees to cover the costs of the increase in insurance bills. In other words, the impact for the higher cost of insurance gets passed on along down the line, and everybody in some way or another feels the pain of it. And so the argument was if the climate was causing this increase in economic costs because you had because there was something going on in the climate that we were causing, that therefore it would be of economic benefit to really curtail this. And this is where the whole concept of a carbon cap came in from. The problem is that the damage that they were assessing and predicting on the environmentalist side never came into fruition. The increase in damages that they had predicted never occurred. But they still put in place measures that cost people to offset this hypothetical risk. In other words, when you're an insurance company and you're doing insurance, you need to calculate the risk or the probability of some bad event occurring. And there's a whole group of people who do nothing but risk assessment. And these are people who are primarily in the insurance industry. If your assessment is off, then the cost of the measure that you put in will still have an impact, even though there is no impact by the projected risk that never occurs. And this is the case with the environmental laws. The environmental laws introduced a premium to insurance and all other costs for a risk that never actually is not occurring. And there is no real, the risk that we're seeing out there now in terms of the financial cost, in terms of what's occurring in the environment, is not real. There's nothing being realized. So this money isn't really, is simply going into government coffers, and the governments, as we see now, are spending out of control. The way they're spending is they're now used to it. Before they were used to $1 million budgets. Now they were used to $1 billion budgets. Now we're talking about $1 trillion budgets. They're spending trillions of dollars without thinking about it. And of course, this is going to have an impact on a person's everyday wallet. So one of the economic measures that are put in to offset this carbon thing is they started saying we can turn things like corn, grain, any grains into alcohol. You can put alcohol into cars and you can run cars off alcohol. So they did this. The problem was, though, is that this pushed the food prices, the price for corn, because the farmers started shifting their crops over to the fuel crop rather than for food. This pushed price of pork. This pushed all the animal feeds, all your grain prices started going up because there was an extra demand on the grains that didn't exist before. And so as this occurred, and as the prices started going up, what you started seeing in the supermarket is you started seeing your food prices go up. And now, in addition to that, they started putting this stuff in. They started putting these restrictions on your electric companies in terms of how they could produce their electricity. They started taking down coal plants, saying that the coal plants were were causing too much pollution. So they took that down. And as the supply of electricity came down, the cost for electricity went up. As they put in more regulations to generate electricity, the cost of electricity went up. This cost of electricity being put on these corporations, these large, tax the rich type of things. Here's how it comes out. If you're a small business owner or you run a grocery store and now you have to pay these higher electrical costs for your building, that cost is going to be tacked onto the food that you sell. When you're buying food in the grocery store, you're paying for the cost of that grocery store to keep that grocery store running. If you walk down the refrigerator aisle, you see all these refrigerators and these freezers going, and you can imagine, and you think of the electric bill that this store is generating. You now have to take a look at the prices that you're paying for food and think that price for electricity is now being paid for by you, the consumer. So when you see your food prices go up 30, 40, 50, 60%, you can see it following the increase in price on electricity. You can see it on these regulations. And so you can see taxes coming in, being produced by the Obama type administration, by these social left governments who believe that the government should tax in order to get, tax the rich in order to help people out and give people more entitlements. You can now start seeing food prices start to rise up. And this is what I said before about why union workers and the middle class is starting to disappear. It has nothing to do with that people were being mean to these workers. It has to do with the fact that the social left governments are taxing them out of existence. Here's what happens. When you calculate the cost of a product, not only do you have to calculate the cost of the building, what it keeps to run the building, in terms of the electricity, your gas, your energy costs, and so on and so forth, but you also have to include your labor. Labor is a major part of any product's price. And it's not just labor. The costs are they're not simply passed on equally. It's cost plus profit. Right? The profit comes back as, in several forms. It comes back as salaries for employees. It comes back as dividends for shareholders. And if you are a union person and you have a pension, this is something you need to be concerned with because your pensions are in the stock. And if that stock tanks, so does your pension. And the thing is, if you understand pensions and you understand the banking system, Everything works on these stock investments. If the stocks tank, your banks tank, your pension funds tank, it is going to wipe everything out. This is what happened in 2008. When the system went broke, it went broke for a lot of good economic reasons, but again, it was push broke, and you can see the mechanisms that it was push broke by economic policy brought forward by the Democrats. And the mechanism becomes clear when you understand the mechanisms of that run the economy. And this is not academic exercise. This is something more specific. And there are two forms of economic model. There is the static and statistical academic model, which is based purely on mathematics. It is a mathematical, rigid model that uses pure mathematics for this. There's no in statistics. There's no need for reality in here. So it's not a dynamic model. So your academics use a static model. They use a statistical model. But the bankers, people who are out in the banking industry, and you really do need to make money from this. The economics you need to use need to be dynamic. And this is where someone like myself, who is not an economist, I'm not an academic economist, I'm a physicist, I'm an astrophysicist. My job and part of my work is to go out and model the universe. My interest was in nuclear reactions in the course of stars. It's in quantum physics. It's, and I'm now into open exploration of the universe. And because the field includes dynamic modeling, because I need to model things as they are, not as a hypothetical model, but I need to model them in real time. A lot of the way I observe and develop my models needs to be dynamic. And this same dynamic model can be applied to economics, because the economic system, as it occurs today, is a fairly dynamic system. It's no longer the monostatic system that had existed pre-1980. There has been a fundamental change in the economy. When we went from a primarily Eurocentric economy, this is what we were in the past, pre-1980, we were primarily a Eurocentric economy. Everything was centered around Europe and the United States. That's where primarily most of the economy was centered around. And it was typically an old-style bricks and mortar system that was run from the top down through bankers and so on and so forth. And there really wasn't any room for the small guy in terms of, and I'm talking about small cap investment. But since 1980, and this was what Ronald Reagan brought in, when he deregulated the system and got government out of business and allowed government to stand on its own, and allowed businesses to stand on its own without government interference, then even the small guy could start up and build his own business. And the thing is it's an ironic situation, because the United States had been there, it had been turned off, and then brought back again. To give an example of how things are, you need to watch, and I'll be putting a link to this in the down below bar. It's a documentary called by Daniel Yergin, called The Prize. It's about the development of oil. If you what I want you to pay attention to, I want you to pay attention to the creators of Exxon, which is Standard Oil, that's J.D. Rockefeller. See how he came up, see how the oil industry came up, and you'll see that the United States had this penchant for making people who were self-made millionaires. These people they started off small, and they made their own fortunes. And that's because the government wasn't sort of standing in the way and saying, no, you can't do that, or telling people exactly how to do things and sort of keeping things safe, reducing the risk for people. The whole idea was that you can go out, take the risk, and if you failed, you got up, dusted yourself off, and you tried again. And you kept doing it until you succeeded. But this concept really seems to be lost on the socialists, who live in these very comfortable. The socialists and socialism come from a very regal, an imperialistic, and an aristocratic background. This is the background of socialism. They had no need for practicality. They had no need for reality because everything was in their sort of their closed-in world of this aristocracy, and they lived the way they lived, and there was no need to really, you didn't have to feed yourself because someone else fed you. You didn't have to wipe your own butt because someone else did that for you. You had servants for everything. You even have, you go back and to look at these old books, and there's an old PBS document, or BBC show called Jeeves and Wooster, and you'll see that there's a person there called a valet, and the job of the valet, and this is part of a butler and a man's man, is to dress the gentleman. In other words, if you're an aristocratic gentleman, you didn't dress yourself; someone else dressed you. I mean, this is the extent that the intellectual nothingness that was occurring is that they had nothing to do all day long. They didn't have to work. They didn't have to make any money. So they were able to sit around and think of these things. And this is what intellectualism is. Intellectualism is the concept that you're standing around doing nothing, and all you have to do is think about things. So the entire world around you is a concept. Well, if you're from the real world and you actually have to earn a living for whatever you're doing, this isn't reality. It's fantasy. And this is the difference between an academic economist and a bank economist. A bank economist keeps his job because he keeps the bank earning money. The academic economist he doesn't have to earn any money from his theories and ideas. He just simply has to come up with theories and ideas, and as long as he's good enough to assert them and make them sound smart enough, he'll make lots of money in terms of his salary, in terms of his benefits and pension. So there's no need for an academic economist or an intellectual to really do anything if they get into the university and get their tenure. They simply live a life of fantasy. But if you're a person who's living in the real world and you have to build yourself up from nothing, then this isn't your reality. This isn't reality for you, and you need to sort of look at what's going on in reality. And this is what's changed in between 1980 and 2000 is when Ronald Reagan opened the door, the floodgates opened, and a lot of people saying, I can do this. And you had a lot of people jumping in on the bandwagon. It's the Reagan concept that anyone could do whatever they want again. The bring back the that you had Silicon Valley come up and start up. This is that produced Bill Gates. It produced Steve Jobs. It produced Apple. Everything that came out of Silicon Valley, all the devices we have now, all came out of this sort of mindset that we were free to do whatever we wanted to do in the 1980s. This same ideal of freedom, infected both India and China and produced what they produced. Europe, who always stayed in the mindset of this social imperialism, this elegance of intellectualism, looked at it and then turned away and say, we're staying the way we are. And so what happens is you have now China and everyone growing up and being great entrepreneurs. You see these great Chinese entrepreneurs now. You see the Indian entrepreneurs. You see the slumdog millionaires. All this is American. This is the idealism of individuality. And it doesn't mean you have to be mean and so on and so forth. It means you can choose to do whatever you want to do. If you want to be mean with your money, fine. But if you want to be a charitable person, you want to be a philanthropist, the way J.D. Rockefeller made the most amount of money in terms of a wealthy person that you could ever have. And at the end of the day, when he was exiting this world, he gave it all away. I mean, that's something that's sort of truly amazing. To see that a person who made X amount of money, who could have done anything he wanted, chose to be a philanthropist. And I think there's one thing to force philanthropy on people, and another thing to choose philanthropy. Totally two different things. And so if you're sitting out there now wondering, and you're in need of a job, and you're wondering what's going to happen with you in the economy, this is the channel for you, because we're going to take and I've done this over a couple of years and then bring a lot of this out now. I did the dynamic modeling, the physics modeling of the economy. I have a good economic model here, and I'm going to share it with you. And I'm also going to share it with a couple other groups I've talked to on this channel here, and I'll be getting in contact with them, with the OECD, that's the European economic body, about the new economy that's occurring now, and then the new dynamics within the economy. And the goal is rather than having the government do things for you, I'm going to show you how things work in the economy, and then you can do things for yourself. I'm going to try to open up and give you the equal access to the understanding of the banking economy that a banker would have. So I hope you join us. I will try to. I'm going to be putting this out on a weekly basis, usually on Wednesdays, on the weekends. Between Saturday and Sunday, you will see a weekly economics report. There doesn't need to be anything more than that, because the economy actually moves quite slowly from the point of view of the average person. The economy moves in by the quarter. First quarter, second, third quarter, fourth quarter. And a quarter is basically 3 months. It's 1 quarter of a year. You have 12 months in a year. 1 quarter of that is 3 months. Because 3 times 4 is 12. Right? So now you can see that. So the first quarter is January, February, March. Right? Second quarter is April, May, June. And now you can sort of figure out the rest yourself. So you don't need to do anything more than a weekly show, and that's what we're doing here. We'll be looking at the presidential, the GOP primary race. We will look into the economic arguments of what's being put forward. We'll look at the economic policies of Obama and see how the two sides play out. We will look in more in depth how policy affects the economy, and in particular how it affects the personal economy of your own wallet. So I welcome you to the channel. This is DECB Economics TV. This is economic news for everybody. Have a good evening.